Welcome to the Miscarriage Hope Desk Podcast, where we help women struggling with recurrent pregnancy loss by sharing stories of hope and interviews with experts in the field of fertility and miscarriage. If you want to download our free lab checklist, go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/labs. Again, you will go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/LABS to download your free checklist. If you want to connect with others going through recurrent miscarriage, please check out our show notes for a link to our Facebook group. Now I'm going to hand it over to your host, Laura Bowder, for today's episode.
Welcome back to the Miscarriage Hope Desk Podcast. Today I have Dr. Reena Singh with me, and Dr. Singh is a naturopathic doctor. She specializes in fertility and preconception health. She received her doctorate in naturopathic medicine from the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine in 2007. She's also published a fertility case study in a naturopathic journal, and she's the creator of the Fertility Foundations course. So Dr. Singh, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your expertise with us. To start with, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into naturopathic medicine?
Absolutely. So I always like to say that naturopathic medicine kind of found me. Mm-hmm. So I was in my late teens, early 20s, and I got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is a pretty severe inflammatory bowel disease. And just in the process of trying to understand what my body was going through and then how to take care of it, I had to go through all of the traditional allopathic medications and the roller coaster ride of medications and then side effects from the medication.
Sure.
And so I was on that for a few years until I finally was introduced to natural medicine and tried it out, and within just a few months just saw immense benefits in how I was feeling, and eventually was able to reverse my entire disease process by using natural medicine. And that just blew my mind, opened my eyes to how amazing our bodies are. And it went against the narrative that I had been told, that I would always have to live with this disease, that I would have to take medications my entire life, and that having children was not very likely. And so, coming from that mindset and what I was being told, and to now pretty much having reversed the disease using natural medicine, I was just like, oh my gosh, our bodies are so amazing. And if we just kind of allow our bodies to regain balance, amazing things can happen. And since I experienced it firsthand, I was just like, oh my God, I have to help everybody else do this. And so that's what led me down the path of becoming a naturopathic doctor, and then focusing on the gut initially, for sure, since that was my background. But my passion was always just healthy babies and understanding, like, how can we help mom and dads to understand how they can prep their bodies for conception and the healthiest pregnancy possible. And through my experience, and then through all my research, I just found that there was this immense body of knowledge that is not being shared with the general public. Just that, there's so much we can do to really heal and prep our bodies, kind of no matter what our history is of maybe, of an inflammatory bowel disease or other types of health issues, no matter what has gone on in the past, there's so much we can still do to truly optimize our health and help our bodies get ready for baby, and try to, lower the risk of issues that can come up during pregnancy, or even lower the risk for miscarriage. And so that's what led me kind of to where I am today, and just what I do and how I help couples try to understand what's going on and figure out where they need to focus their attention on, and then give them a plan of how to do that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important. It's something that a lot of women and a lot of couples, like you mentioned, are not always aware that there are alternative options. And a lot of people, if they're struggling with their fertility or they're experiencing recurrent loss and they go to a traditional doctor, they'll be more likely to probably be referred out to somewhere else, right? Like maybe a fertility specialist or a clinic that may be talking to them about further steps, such as, maybe trying IUI or IVF. What are your thoughts about that process, and what do you think that maybe naturopathic medicine would offer that would be different than what traditional medicine does?
Yes, and I'm so excited. I'm so happy you asked that question because I that is one of my top frustrations today within our fertility world, is that couples who are struggling, who have had issues, they are, in my mind, kind of prematurely pushed into the medical route, down the IVF or IUI or medical treatment kind of pathway, without first taking a step back to understand, okay, what's going on? First of all, it's like, why don't we take a step back and just see where and if there are any imbalances or deficiencies that could be contributing to the fertility issues, instead of just saying, okay, well, you haven't gotten pregnant in this amount of time. That means you are now have to get referred off to a specialist. And then once you get to the specialist, their world is medications, hormonal treatments, procedures, and there is a whole world of opportunity before getting to that point, in my mind. And so that's where I get excited. So the couples that seek out someone like me, naturopathic medicine, are people who are ready who understand that, hey, maybe there is something going on, that this may be a sign of things maybe going on in my foundation, in my system, in my background systems that need to be addressed. And that's the message I would love to get out there, is that, yes, I'm so grateful that we have all of these options available to our couples. I think it's amazing. However, I also feel that many couples are prematurely sent down that route when they may not need to be quite yet. And so, yeah.
Yes, I think it's interesting because sometimes there's a frustration that people feel like maybe they aren't being referred out somewhere soon enough. Like, it can be frustrating that you have to experience a certain number of losses or wait a certain amount of time before a doctor will consider the next steps. At the same time, and I don't want to, I want to be clear that we're not providing medical advice for the general public here, but just something to consider. If you have experienced recurrent losses, what do you think people should maybe be thinking about as far as those systems that they might need to discuss with their own doctors, or find a naturopathic doctor to discuss those things with, that they could maybe look into a little bit further if this is their experience?
Yes. So yes, I absolutely agree that, initially we definitely want to get the traditional medical workup, especially when it comes to recurrent pregnancy loss, because they're very good at understanding if there are any structural issues or anything of that nature, which absolutely need to be determined. Once those things have been ruled out, then it's really nice to bring someone like myself, like a naturopathic doctor, on board at this point, because we're able to then work with the information that we get from your blood work, from your labs, from any kind of imaging, from talking with you and about your kind of history of your menstrual cycles, how long you've been on birth control in the past, and all of these kinds of things give us clues as to, okay, what might be going on in your foundation. And what I mean by the foundation is, I like to use the analogy of the soil. And so when a woman comes to me, I say, okay, well, when you're going to plant some seeds in your garden, hoping that they're going to grow and then flower, if that soil is not tended to first. You shouldn't just throw a bunch of seeds on some soil that's kind of been there forever and has been dried out and hasn't really been tended to, and then expect some beautiful flowers to grow. You know, we would tend that garden. We would clean it up. We'd pull out the weeds. We would put new soil in there, organic fertilizer, and we would water it, and we would make sure it's ready before planting those seeds. And it's the same thing with our bodies. And so we want to prep the soil of our body and get it ready for that seed that we want to plant. And so when it comes to couples who have had miscarriages and they want to take a step back, what we do is try to address the soil, the foundation. And what I mean by that is it's like we look at the systems that make up the foundation. And those systems in my mind are the gut. You know, how is digestion working? How is the gut functioning? And then the thyroid, the adrenals, you know, the immune system in general, because all of those things are working together in the background to help maintain hormonal balance, to ensure that, you know, egg quality is the best it can be, to make sure the lining of the uterus is as optimal as it can be. And so by taking a step back and focusing on these foundational systems, that is then going to kind of prep the soil, the, you know, the egg quality, the ovarian health, the uterine lining health, general health in general, making sure our bodies have the nutrients we need to feed all of the cells, the eggs, and then later on that embryo that's going to grow and then mature and be nourished by, you know, within your uterus. And so that's why just taking a step back and saying, okay, are there any nutrient deficiencies that need to be addressed? Is there any inflammation going on in the body? Because I'll give you a couple of you know, specific examples. And I'll start with the gut, right? Because that's one of my favorite areas. But the gut is really where pretty much all naturopathic doctors are going to focus on first, because it truly is the center of our health. And the reason for this is that, you know, it has its own little ecosystem going on in there. Like we have so many like bacteria and viruses and fungus and all kinds of organisms growing in our gut. But if we focus on the bacteria, you know, we always talk about the balance of good versus maybe not so good bacteria. And why that's important is because when that gets thrown off, that can then impact the vaginal microbiome, which can then increase the chances for, you know, bacterial vaginosis and other types of infections. And then once you get pregnant, the microbiome of your gut, the balance of that bacteria in your gut can also influence the placenta later on, which then is nourishing and feeding your baby.
Right.
And so that's why it's so important to, you know, start with the gut. And IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, which is a very common kind of gut issue that many women have. Many women of reproductive age are diagnosed with some sort of IBS. And it has been found that women who have IBS are at an increased risk for suffering from a miscarriage. And so it just makes sense that we, you know, we take a step back, address any issues going on with the gut, whether there are overt symptoms of IBS, irritable bowel syndrome going on, or if even sometimes there's not overt symptoms of gut issues, but then when I analyze her blood work and I can look at what I'm seeing in her blood work and I'm looking at it saying, it looks like you're not breaking down, absorbing, digesting the nutrients as well as you could be. That's an issue, because if we, you know, we could be eating the most pristine diet, but if we're not extracting those vitamins and minerals and nutrients from the food, how is it going to feed all the cells? How is it going to get to that growing egg, those follicles in the ovary, you know, which is going to eventually become your baby? How is that going to feed the lining of your uterus to prep for implantation? And so it's a domino effect. And so that's why taking a step back and focusing on these core kind of fundamentals, the foundation is so important.
Yeah. And so I want to point the audience to, in the show notes, we always have a link to a lab checklist that they can, bring to their doctor or see what they've had done recently and what they might need to be redone. So I think it's really great that you then would use that and take a look at it as well. I think that if you're going the traditional medicine route, if you do your blood work and you find that everything comes back, within the normal range, then a lot of doctors will probably be more likely to either say you have unexplained infertility, or there's no reason they can see why you're experiencing miscarriages and you just need to keep trying. So I want to say thank you for kind of shedding some light on some other things that people might need to look into, because I think there can still be a lot going on in the background, like you said, that can be contributing to something that doctors are saying is unexplained. Do you find that people come to you a lot of the time, having had that experience with traditional medicine, that they haven't really been able to find a satisfactory answer?
Yes, I will say that the majority of the couples that find me have been either struggling for a while to get pregnant, or they have already gone down the IVF route, but it hasn't been successful. So, I've had anywhere from couples trying it 2-3 times all the way up to 12 times, 12 failed IVF cycles.
Wow.
Yeah. And so and then of course there are some couples who are trying to prevent going down that route. And so they will find me that way as well. And so I'm happy to work with anyone who is just ready to take a step back and, kind of figure out what's going on within their own systems, so that we can try to minimize the number of medical interventions, that are needed.
Sure.
And I'm so glad that you brought up the blood work, because that is such an important factor, because I can't tell you how many times I've had women reach out to me and tell me, it's like, oh, everything's came back normal in my blood work. Everything's within the normal range. And here's my message. Here's my take home for that, is that just because it's normal on your blood report doesn't mean that it's optimal.
Yes.
Because the ranges that they use on your blood work are a reflection of the population of the people that lab is testing in that region of where you are living. And so you may not necessarily be, you're not being compared to healthy people, and possibly. And so our goal is to really take your blood work results and look at them compared to what's considered optimal, and looking at them together, within patterns of one another in the reports. And that's how we can gather and kind of figure out, okay, where are the specific imbalances, deficiencies going on that need to be addressed? Because I can't tell you how many times thyroid is a perfect example that we can talk about as well, because the thyroid is critical for fertility, of course, in general, for babies' neurodevelopment in utero, as well as for lowering the risk for miscarriage. And I cannot tell you how many times women will send me their blood work, and all they've had tested are maybe, a few markers, maybe just the TSH, maybe just the T4, possibly a T3, but that's not enough. And so I'm so glad that you offer, a list of blood work to get, because we absolutely need to evaluate the thyroid from all angles. And it just blows my mind that so many times the antibodies haven't been tested. And so the TSH, which is the standard thyroid marker that is typically run on all blood work.
Yes.
However, all the TSH is just the signal from the brain to the thyroid. That's all it is. It's just an indicator of, is it sensing enough thyroid hormone in the body? And that's it. However, it doesn't tell us the amount of T4, the amount of T3. T3 is the active thyroid hormone in our body. And so we need to understand, how much of the inactive versus the active thyroid hormone that you have in your body, because there could be conversion issues. And so many times I have seen that the TSH will be normal or close to normal. So then they don't run everything else. But then when I run their antibody levels are off the charts. They could be in the hundreds, they could be in the 500s. And I'm just like, whoa. And so we know from medical research that women who have thyroid issues, who have a lowered functioning thyroid, if they have antibodies to their thyroid, they are at an increased risk for miscarriage. So again, this is one of the main reasons that we need a more thorough evaluation of blood work. And so it's such an important area to focus on, and the thyroid is critical. And so yes, absolutely get a thorough evaluation of your thyroid done. Make sure you get the list, you download the list so you'll know what to ask for.
Yes, I think the thyroid is such a common thing that doctors will say, oh yeah, I checked and it's fine. It's not an issue. And just, anecdotally, I don't have research on this, but I find that a lot of women will experience, symptoms of having hypothyroid, or, they feel off for a variety of reasons. And once they do look into it further, again, just anecdotally, they do end up having like one of those other things that you mentioned. Once you start testing in more detail and more thoroughly, there is really something going on that the TSH just doesn't tell the whole story. And kind of
Absolutely.
linked with the thyroid, I know then people might also be looking into what is your adrenal function. I hear adrenal fatigue kind of thrown around, being related to just, chronic fatigue symptoms, feeling stressed or anxious. Can you kind of tie some of that together for us and talk a little bit about how that's all connected?
Yes, I would love to. So so let me tie it in with the thyroid, and then I'll transition into the adrenals.
Sure.
So the thyroid, I always tell women who just like exactly what you just said. It's like my labs look fine, but I have all these symptoms, so I know something's not right, but they won't do anything for it because on paper I look fine. And
exactly.
it's so unfortunate, but it's such a common it's so common, unfortunately. And here's what I always say. I always say that the thyroid is a victim gland. Our poor little thyroid is a victim because it is so dependent on and so influenced by everything else going on in the body. And so in order for our thyroid to work its best, to function optimally, it depends on the gut, it depends on the liver, it depends on the adrenals, it depends on a stable blood sugar, it depends on lowered inflammation in the body. And so if any of those things are out of whack or out of balance, that will absolutely impact the functioning of the thyroid. And so I rarely have to ever give medication to help the thyroid, because once we fix all of these underlying systems and we get the gut working better and we get the liver and blood sugar and stress, which we're going to talk about, better, the thyroid just it's like the thyroid just takes a big sigh of relief. It's like, I can start working again.
Yeah.
And I see that so often, over and over. Like thyroid antibodies will drop from like the 500s down to within normal range, and it's possible.
Yeah.
And I want women to know that it is absolutely possible, just by, focusing on our bodies in general and all these systems that the thyroid depends on. And so the thyroid is very dependent on the gut, like I just said, because a lot of the conversion from inactive thyroid hormone to active thyroid happens between the gut and the liver. That's kind of the two predominant systems that the thyroid depends on for our thyroid to get converted. But it also depends on our adrenals. And many people have heard of the adrenals. They're like these two little triangular glands that sit on top of the kidneys. And they're responsible for kind of our get up and go, our cortisol production, our adrenaline. And so we absolutely need our adrenals to pump out cortisol to get us through a situation when we need it. However, kind of in today's society and the amount of pressures we're all under and the stress we're constantly just put ourselves under, or the situations we're in, our poor adrenals are kind of constantly pumping out cortisol in order just to keep us going. And they do that for a point, but then at some point they just kind of poop out. It's like there's only so much they can do.
Yeah.
and what happens is that when we're under stress and our adrenals are working overtime and pumping out the cortisol, what that does is cortisol will rise, and in that process it will then lower all of our other reproductive hormones. So our estrogen, our progesterone, our DHEA, and our testosterone all tank. And so of course that's not good for fertility in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as cortisol is rising or stays elevated, that will then put a stressor on other systems in our body too. And cortisol and insulin work kind of hand in hand as well. As insulin rises, of course, that makes it hard to lose weight. That then throws off the hormone balance as well. And then it can affect the hormones that are then produced within the ovary, and can really throw off the estrogen and progesterone fluctuations that we want to see within the month. And so the take-home message is that all of our hormones are intimately tied together. Nothing works in isolation in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're under stress and cortisol's rising, guess what? Insulin's going to be impacted, melatonin's going to be impacted. All of our other hormones are then going to feel the effects of it. And so this is why we can never just work on one system and
Right.
just say, okay, we're going to do this for this system and then not worry about the rest. It doesn't. The body doesn't work that way. Everything's constantly in communication with one another and talking to each other, because all the systems in the background are trying their best to help you feel your best and get you through every day and try to keep your hormones balanced. But it doesn't take much to throw things off. And so that's why, yes, stress is huge. And working on stress and getting stress down is so important. Just basic things. My main goal for today was really just trying to emphasize taking a step back, focusing on the foundation, and just going back to basics. Focusing on the basics of food and sleep and getting stress down and whatever we can control in our environment. And that will make such a huge create such a huge positive impact on all of your other systems and your hormones that are trying so hard to help you get pregnant and stay pregnant.
Yeah, I think that that's such a great message, and it's something that traditional medicine doesn't always jump to, right? Like you don't hear a lot of doctors saying, oh, like how much stress are you under? Or tell me a little bit about your diet. Sometimes you might hear that if they're concerned about, obesity or something like that. But in general, at least I haven't gotten a lot of questions about anything like that from a traditional doctor. And so I think it's really important to kind of have these other sources of information that we're, sharing, just what else we can look at and what else we can do. And I'm sure there are people listening that are thinking like, well, okay, what do I do if I feel like I'm under a lot of stress, or I know I'm not sleeping as much as I should be? Like, what are my next steps here to then try and remedy some of those situations?
Yeah, great question. It's just every day, it's just reminding yourself that the simplest things can make the most impact.
Mm-hmm.
And so starting with your just daily routine, just start there. I always tell couples, especially women, who are in this, wherever they are on their fertility journey, because it can create a lot of stress, and it's just counterproductive, because our body wants to be in a calm or parasympathetic state, but yet given the situation, whatever may be going on, we're kind of being pulled to this other side where it's like chronic stress, the sympathetic state. And our body, fertility, doesn't flourish in a sympathetic or stress state. It's like the body wants to be back in a calm state. And so just a few simple things you can do. The first one, of course, is just breathing. And I always recommend like alternate nostril breathing. That's a tremendously beneficial way to just shift back into that parasympathetic state. The other thing to do is just first thing in the morning, go outside, walk barefoot in the grass, in real grass. I know it's so simple, right? But by walking in real grass and not wearing sunglasses and allowing that morning light to hit your eyes and your skin, that is sending all kinds of chemical messages and transmitting chemicals that is then going to stimulate cortisol in the morning, which is what we want, and then allowing cortisol to fall throughout the day, and which will then allow melatonin to rise at night. And so this is how the body's constantly communicating and working together. So if we can just do some simple things, just walking in the grass in the morning, and allowing natural light to hit our face and our eyes and our skin, that's going to set the stage for hormonal balance throughout the day. That's amazing. And then the other thing is food, just really taking every bite with intention and understanding, what is this feeding me? Is it helping me or hurting me with every bite? Just understanding that, because we also know from research that our diet matters, and our traditional Western diet has been found to be very low in antioxidants, low in vitamins, low in fiber. And what this does is it increases oxidative stress. And we now know that the higher the oxidative stress in the body, the more fertility issues we have, the more increased risk for miscarriage. And this is true for men and for women, because egg quality and sperm quality are affected. And one of the markers that I definitely look at and encourage everyone to get run is homocysteine, because we are getting more and more research. We're understanding more from research that elevated levels of homocysteine can be a reflection of oxidative stress and inflammation in the body. And for women, higher homocysteine levels can be a reflection of inflammation that's in the follicular fluid that's surrounding your follicles in the ovaries. And so this is why just taking a step back, focusing on food and our just lifestyle is so important, because by making small changes, we can affect huge aspects of our fertility and pregnancy.
And I love that you mentioned, first of all, like the food directly impacts levels of inflammation in the body. I think that's really important to remember. And I want to hear you talk a little bit more about how it impacts the male side of the equation as well, because I think as women, we, can put a lot of stress on ourselves, a lot of pressure on ourselves, and think that, if we're having issues getting pregnant or staying pregnant, that it is something that is inherently in us and something that we need to fix. And I'm sure that's not always the case. So I'd love to hear your experience about that from working with couples.
I am so glad you asked that. Yes. So I don't remember how far back it was, but it was a relatively recent article that came out in a medical journal that stated, recurrent miscarriages can be attributed to sperm quality. And it's like, oh my gosh, why aren't we focusing more on the sperm and sperm quality? And so this is why it's so important to focus on the couple together, because it's not just the woman, it's not just the egg quality, it's the sperm quality, sperm health is 50% of the equation. And so it absolutely matters. And what's so fascinating is that the timeline is very similar. So the kind of when eggs are starting to kind of wake up from their dormant sleepy state and start entering into their active growth phase, before they then become mature enough to get ovulated, that active phase is around 3 months. And what's interesting is that the sperm timeline is around the same time. It's around 100 days. And so, and for men, of course, we have, so much opportunity because it's brand new sperm getting made. And so we can affect the quality of sperm in a relatively short period of time. And I cannot tell you how many times I have evaluated the husband or the partner's blood work and run all of the inflammatory markers and run other, just looking at their digestion and their thyroid and inflammation and blood sugar. And it's 10 times worse than the woman, and it's never been evaluated. Yeah. And so absolutely, it is so important to do. And it's, fertility is a journey for the couple. And so it's something that they can make these changes and implement together, which is so nice. And yes, bottom line is that we want to get our husbands, our partners on board along with us on this journey. And so, because with them understanding that the quality of their sperm matters so much, they will then be more motivated to make the changes that they need to as well. And we tend to just focus on the semen analysis, which is this, quantity, and just morphology and count and those kind of more just very strict objective markers, but not taking into account the subjective, the quality of that sperm makes all the difference. And so if the man, if the husband also has poor digestion, if his diet isn't very good, if he has inflammation, guess what? How are his sperm going to extract the nutrients? How are they going to get all of the vitamins and minerals and energy that they need to look right, to be shaped right, to move in the right direction, to get to where they need to go? And so we can absolutely make a huge impact, again, with small changes with the man. So yeah, it's so important.
Yeah, you can go back to basics with both partners.
Absolutely. Yes. 100%.
And I think that as women, we're just, I don't know, it's partly, a socialization thing, and partly, it's just biology that ultimately the baby grows in the woman. But there is definitely the male aspect that also needs to be looked into, I think, in most, if not all, infertility or recurrent pregnancy loss situations.
100%. I could not agree with you more. Yep, exactly.
So what would you say, we're focusing on this, going back to basics, there's lots of very small tweaks and changes that can be made. So if someone is listening to this, they're experiencing or have experienced recurrent pregnancy loss, what might be a good first step or your biggest piece of advice, biggest takeaway that they can get from this episode and decide how they want to move forward?
So the first one I would say is take back control. So many times we've kind of given our power away, given our control away to medical institutions. And we're just kind of passively taking things and doing things without not truly understanding how it's impacting our health. So take back that control. Simplest things, again, just focusing on your diet, your food. The quality of your food matters. Just start with that. If there's anything you can do, just start with the quality of your food. Eat lots of vegetables, eat as organic as possible, drink lots of water. If you can just start there, that's huge. Make sure you're sleeping, and staying asleep through the night. So if that's an issue, work with someone to figure that out, because sleep is huge. We talked a little bit about stress. Stress is huge. And then chemicals in our environment. Chemicals are huge and massive. And I feel like they are playing such a huge role with our health in general, but especially with fertility and possibly with recurrent miscarriages. So, just if we want to keep it simple, just, no more nonstick pots. Just start with that. No more nonstick pots and no more plastic water bottles. Start there. That's a good place to start. There's so much more you can do, but start with the basics. And then I would say the other thing is get your blood work, get thorough blood work done. Number one, get thorough blood work done. So
Yes.
get that list and get the appropriate blood work done, and then get it analyzed appropriately. Get it analyzed so that it's you're understanding where you fall compared to optimal ranges, and then find out where your specific imbalances or deficiencies are that you can start working on. And so that there's so much information that you can gather from your blood work, but it needs to be analyzed from a different viewpoint, from someone who is trained to look at it and say, okay, this is not an optimal range, and looking at these markers together, this is telling me that there's we need to work on the gut, we need to work on the thyroid conversion, these specific nutrients are missing. There's so much information you can get from your blood work, but number one, just get the more comprehensive blood work done so you get all the markers you need, and then get it analyzed. So I would say that those are kind of the two broad areas to start with, and take it from there.
Yeah. And I love that advice, because I think a lot of times, if we get blood work back and the doctor says, well, that's all normal, so we don't have to worry about that anymore, that's not a factor. We're pulled, we want to listen to the doctor and believe that they know best. But a lot of times we're still feeling like something is off, something isn't working as it should. And that just creates confusion when the doctor is telling you something and, you don't necessarily feel that it's aligning with your experience.
If you are struggling to get pregnant, or you've had a couple of miscarriages, clearly there might be some imbalances going on. So don't settle for, everything looks normal, you're fine. Don't settle. Keep digging deeper. That absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more.
So I want to thank you for sharing that perspective. And I would also love to give you an opportunity to tell the listeners where they can connect with you online.
Yes, thank you. I would love for you to connect with me in whichever venue you prefer. So my website is zamawellness.com. And then I'm on Facebook as well with Zama Wellness. And then on Instagram, my tag is @FertilityDoctor. And so those are kind of the main areas that you can find me. So please definitely join me, in any of these areas. Reach out to me if you have any questions. Love to hear from you.
Great. And all of those links will be in the show notes, so you can reach out and connect with Dr. Singh. And Dr. Singh, I just want to thank you again for coming on and sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you so much. It was an honor. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our show notes for details on joining our Facebook group and for following along on Instagram. If you would like a free recurrent pregnancy loss lab checklist, go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/labs. Again, that's miscarriagehopedesk.com/LABS to get your free downloadable checklist. And for even more resources, visit the Miscarriage Hope Desk website, where we have stories of hope plus an entire library of evidence-based research articles related to fertility and miscarriage. If you enjoyed this episode, I would so appreciate it if you rate, reviewed, and subscribed to the Miscarriage Hope Desk podcast. Your ratings and reviews will help others to find us. I want to wrap up by saying that if you are going through a miscarriage, my heart goes out to you, and as difficult as your experience may be, I want you to know that you are not alone and that you will find a path forward.